An Egyptian, a Hittite, and a Hebrew are all sitting around a campfire swapping creation stories. What would seem weird and what would seem normal? This week, we're talking to Rachel Booth Smith, who wrote a book called Rest Assured, where she investigates in a very readable book, even at the high school level or a small group level, ancient Near Eastern text and the creation account and how it kind of all leads into Sabbath and how Sabbath means things that maybe we didn't think it meant. It's a fascinating read. I'm very impressed by how she made things that really only scholars talk about accessible and readable for just about anybody. Once again, fascinating conversation. Stay tuned.
This is the Biblical Mind Podcast, produced by the Center for Hebraic Thought. Honest 5-star reviews help others find this podcast. Visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org for articles and videos that explore the deep structures of Scripture.
One way I tell it that seems to work is I say, imagine a campfire of different backgrounds. And I think there's some pastoral nomads, so I think it's fair to picture this happening, even if we don't have a record of it. But imagine, the Hittite sitting there, and then you've got the Egyptian there, and you've got Joe Hebrew here, and, you've got this whole campfire of these guys sitting around and they're looking up at the stars, and somebody says, tell me your story. Tell me how it happened. What do you think it was? And, you'd hear one guy's story, and then you hear another guy's story, and then you hear the Hebrew story and the Jewish story. And as he would tell it, I say, sometimes I think that the campfire would get very upset. And sometimes I think the campfire would be like, oh, okay. And they would say, this is falling into the rhythm of what we understand. They would sit back relaxed. And sometimes they might get up and leave. And sometimes it's offensive. Sometimes it's beautiful and beyond compare. And so when the campfire gets animated, that's when we want to lean in and be like, And that has developed interest. People are like, oh, that sounds interesting. I can understand that.
Yeah. Could we also throw the American fundamentalist evangelical, which I am loosely related with that tradition? Could we put them around the campfire, and would they be offended or would they see similarities?
Well, first off, I tell them they're not at the campfire. I say you're eavesdropping.
You're not invited. Yeah.
I call it holy eavesdropping. I say, we're listening in on a conversation that was happening. And so that's part of what you have to overcome. And secondly, our questions aren't the same questions they have. So I say, it can be a little bit rude to assert your primary interest into the conversation when that's not what they're asking. And I didn't let my 5-year-old do that. So I don't think that's fair for us to do that either. But I do think there's some things that are hard. I think God's delivering some truths that are a little bit difficult to hear, in a good way, right? In a good way. But I think overall his message is one that we probably miss out on. Like, I think you hear a lot about the power and majesty of creation, and a lot of times we skip the goodness, like, why is goodness repeated? Not just because it's good, because he's good, right? And so, there's a lot in there that is good digging into.
And where do you find, as you're explaining these things, because it reads very much like you have talked through these things with other people. As you're explaining, where do you find the biggest stumbling blocks where people, because I could imagine people also saying, like, why are you talking about quote unquote pagan, text and pagan stories? Like, we're talking about what God said, not those people said. Like, you're eavesdropping too far.
Yeah. Like, when I'm citing coffin text spells, right? Like, right. Sometimes the people who look at the endnotes sometimes are like, hey, that is wicked. So I'm like, yeah, fair enough. Fair question. The thing that people mostly struggle with, I think, is the concept of just the idea of reading other stories. I think it's the vocab. When I say, we're going to put Genesis next to these other, I say stories, not myths, because that's a word that just creates all sorts of issues. But then even the word story mixes them up, and we run into the other litmus test, which is inerrancy. And I try to avoid that by saying, we tell the story of Jacob, right? We believe that happened, but the word story I'm using in that way, and that helps. But that's probably, you're right. Like when comparing it to other texts, they say, but ours is true. I say, yeah, it is true, and what is it communicating? It's using this style. It's like the style of a Western, right? Like they're using that style to tell you something very specific. Let's lean into the style.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to drag you into my corner so I can beat you up a little bit right now. So are you ready?
Let me get a drink of water.
Yeah. Well, you have a whole chapter on genre, right? And the one, I might have missed it, right? Because I was reading quickly, but the one genre note you didn't mention was that you have Toledot in there. These are the generations of in the creation, and everywhere else that clearly refers to genetic or genealogical descent. But you didn't seem to count that as part of the genre equation in Genesis 1.
No.
Not every book can do everything. You can't include everybody's opinions, right? But I did wonder, where do you place that genealogical note about creation?
I don't. I haven't thought yet.
Like,
I'm going to go
rip
rip fish in that corner. I don't.
Yeah.
I'll cry foul. I don't have any great thoughts on that or interpretations. I kind of just left it alone.
Okay.
Like
that is a fair response.
Yeah. Yeah. I said amen like a coward and walked away.
Yeah. You're not the first Hebrew Bible scholar that I put that to, and they're like, I don't know. All right.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with that. Great. Okay. So the book is called Rest Assured. Very clever. So what do you, why are you looking at creation through the lens of rest? I think that would catch a lot of people off guard because they don't think of rest as like the thing that's going on in creation. And what kind of work? Well, I'll let you say why the lens of rest, and we can talk about what work that metaphor does for you.
Yeah. So God rested on the seventh day. And so that was one of the big things that really changed for me when I learned that, rest is like sitting down kind of at a throne, because everything is operating correctly. God can sit on his throne. And that's like a good way to end a cosmogony, is to say, yeah, and the deity rests. And it's rest not as in napping, but as in reigning, or like Star Trek, like engaged. We're ready to go, ready to roll. It's like the beginning of something awesome is happening because everything is set up. And so that shift in thinking really, really changed a lot of things for me, because if God is reigning, and that's what that means in the end, and it's saying that God has set up the homeostasis and here we go, we're going to run. What does it mean when he asks me to rest? And what does it mean that God is on the throne? First off, in like Genesis, when he gets to the end and he sits down, there's a couple of really interesting conclusions there. One, there was no battle. So what's that about? But then secondly, like what he set up to run perfectly, like to look at that and to say that was the ideal, that was important. And then also to say who is on the throne. So we all say worship God, God's on the throne, that's great. But I feel like Genesis 1 is saying, but who is God? Like that's what we should be concerned with. Like, and that's what's really, really, really beautiful. And so then once we kind of meditate on who God is on the throne, then our ability to rest is easier. Honestly, I'm happier that he is on the throne. That guy who did all that stuff, thank God. That is who is on the throne. And if we can put all that together and then understand that our call to rest is to actually say, you are God and I am not, in all the jillion areas that we're worried about, then that just changes a lot of things.
Yeah, it's a hard equation, especially for Americans who are very individualist and then functionally oriented towards we take care of everything.
Yeah, I got this.
I have all kinds of insurances so that I don't have to trust God for just about anything, right? Just have to entrust the insurance company. That's not a swipe at insurance.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of our existence.
Yeah.
Would you also see this as a parallel in we think of the ascension of Jesus as him kind of taking his role as a regent with God, but he does sit at a throne, right? He ascends to a throne. So is that the same thing going on with Jesus? You can walk away from this one as well.
I mean, it seems like it. I think it seems like there's that second kingdom, idea that the reign has also been inaugurated for this kingdom come, for the restoration plan is beginning this big arc, and that's a huge piece of it. So, yeah, I think it's on purpose. I think it's a shadow and a mirror and all of those things.
And I know my Jewish listeners will be leaning in right now because it sounds like what you're suggesting is rest means a lot of work in preparation so that you can sit and things will run, right? Which tends to be around the Jewish holidays. This is happening, especially Pesach. But even every week, you have to coordinate your week so that you can sit and let things run, right? Okay. When you talk about Sabbath in the church, do you we have this discussion, I was a pastor getting people say, hey, it's good to take a Sabbath. It's, there's atheists or books written by atheists that are suggesting people should take a Sabbath. But I've come to also realize that it's disingenuous to tell people to take a Sabbath if they're not working 6 days a week. So, which also offend, both sides offend Americans, right? You should tell them hey, you need to stop working 1 day a week and do something else. And also, you need to work 6 days a week, not a weekend. So, do you see both sides operating here in the creation narrative?
I do think there's a 6-1 rhythm for sure. I think the idea of 7 is interesting in that it might not have been if I think about sitting around that campfire, right, and they're listening in, and he says we get to the end and it's day 1. I feel like the campfire would lean in and be like, how many days are we going? Right? Because 7 was really special. 7 meant something really interesting was happening. It was kind of a combination of sacred and lovely. 7 meant something. And so when they get to day 2 and then 3 and then 4, I feel like the campfire would be like, how many are we going to? That's really fun. And so I think the 7 is interesting in that way. And then when God does, starts with the Exodus and the manna from heaven, it's definitely the 6-1 rhythm, right? So you get the 6 and this 1 and then 6 and then 1. And then the prophets, later on when they talk to him, they're kind of upset at what's happening at the 6 and they're upset with what's happening with the 1. They're supposed to be a cohesive unit, not just separated. And so I do think it's interesting that in creation, it is one event and it is recognizing the rain on one day, but then operating within the functions that God has given you in the 6. But if you're doing the 6 wrong, then the 1 isn't going to work out either.
Right.
You can't toggle it and pick and choose, which is, all of the prophets that they're pounding about. And then you get to the Pharisees and to the other, books later where they're adding the rules and the guardrails. And they're like, look, we have to do the 6 right and we have to do the 1 right. They're just really, really concerned about that because they're concerned about holiness and they care. Right. And it's really, I think it was a fair concern to have because they'd really messed it up. And Jesus is like, wow, turns out not quite. Let's reframe it just a touch.
Right. And like so many things with the Pharisees, he both affirms their desire to be holy and to establish traditions of holiness that where there's a lot of improvisation needed, but then chastises them for doing that and not taking on the weightier matters of the law and integrating those, right? So it's part of Jesus's shtick as a prophet. When I was, this is probably 12, 13 years ago when I was working on this book on ritual thinking within the biblical text, it was for the first time in my life, I went through the prophets and it stood out to me, wow, they talk about Sabbath a lot.
right?
It might be one of the most talked about recurring topics across the prophets, and to the point where you get to Isaiah, and it's like eunuchs and foreign people who keep my Sabbaths will have a greater inheritance in the new heavens and new earth, right? And you're like, well, that was surprising. The one that keeps the Sabbath, you thought it'd be keep the Torah. It might even be shorthand for keeping the Torah, right? Justice plan. So I think it is a bit surprising. I wonder functionally how you view in a Christian life. I know people are going to take very different stances and strong and weaker on this, but like, what does Sabbath look like in the weekly Christian life for you?
I mean,
you don't have to prescribe anything.
Yeah, for me personally, if I can get to the end of a Sabbath and realize you are God and I am not, I feel like that was a win. Like, I feel like it's about reorienting my kingdom to his kingdom. And there's just this subtle misunderstanding that grows in my 6 days into my kingdom, my schedule, my, even my things I want to do for Jesus, right? Like I just build myself a house every stinking week. I can't seem to help it. And the 7th day, whatever guardrails you need to set up for yourself, I think it's getting to the spot where you aren't doing or building your own set of things. And so sometimes, that can look like rest. Sometimes that can look like family time. Sometimes that looks like preparing in the 6 so that you can take the 1 off. I think that one's different for everyone, and I'd be pretty hesitant to prescribe that. Because, in your reading about Sabbath, you probably saw there's like hardly any words about it. Like keep it. And you're like, how? And there is just hardly a stinking thing. Like there's hardly any rules around it. And I think that's on purpose. I think that's so that we recognize the King, like specifically. I think going to church is like the very best way to celebrate Sabbath, because that is absolutely that heart orientation shift that happens there. And so that would be my number one. Like if I had to give somebody something, I would say go 1 day a week and make sure you mark that one day and start it at least,
Right. Now, some people will get very particular about go 1 day a week. They'll say, no, the Sabbath is the Sabbath. I mean, there's a Jewish tradition of the eternal Sabbath, that, all years are marked off in actual metaphysical time and space. So I take it you're not a Friday to Saturday, sundown to sundown Sabbath person.
No, I don't see a ton of reason personally for me to adhere to the strict timeline of that. I think it's a lot more about the principle than the thing. And I think Jesus does that too when he's he actually intentionally does a lot of healing miracles on the Sabbath. And I think that's partly because he's declaring his kingship, but he's telling them, I'm doing this restorative act. I'm trying to pull us back and forward into what he designed it to look like. So of course he can do that. The King can do that. In particular, he should do that on Sunday. That's who he is.
Yeah, so even there, and you're right. I mean, Sabbath is almost an entirely improvised ritual, right? It's like a set-aside day, but there's no direction. So it makes sense that if the Pharisees and the people who cared about following the Torah were going to fight about anything, it was going to be the Sabbath, because that, like, you get nothing. You get almost nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't get much more with baptism or communion either. There's a ton of improvisation with both of those. So I wonder what role. So looking back at creation, you put Sabbath or the resting of God as kind of his enthronement, his kingdom. And going back to your comment that you kind of casually threw in there, which I thought was kind of mind blowing, is that if you're a Hebrew hearing this story, or anybody else, you are thinking, wait, how many days is this going to go? So how do you, what do you think is the significance of the breaking up of a week like that? My friend Josh Berman, he casually blew my mind with this statement. He goes, months, days, years are all lunar and solar. Like they're all directly referenced off of some celestial event. There is no such 7-day anything in creation, right? It's a completely artificial thing. So
Yeah.
How does that fit within the ancient Near East? Would that blow their minds, or they'd be like, "Oh yeah, everybody does 7-day weeks"?
I don't know about the 7-day weeks. I know they did I don't know how they did time. I know they did ritual. And I guess when I was studying it and looking it up, I just started looking up what's like a priestess installation. What is, a dedication for a temple or a shrine and just kind of started reading through that. There was one that was like a love letter that I found, and he was like, I love you 7 ways. Let me count them, and he was like jumping on the 7 theme. And so I didn't necessarily look at like the days, like the marking of the days, but more like why did he pick 7? Like what would 7 have triggered for them in their mind? And I think it would have triggered like special and holy and sacred and intentional, like marked out, right? So that was, I don't know, I thought that was really fun to think about the campfire, I don't know any other days marked out like that. I've read all the creation ones I can get a hold of, and nobody else is very intentional with it. The days thing is kind of unique in Genesis, and so that's something worth noting, right? When they start off without a battle or without a conflict, there's always chaos. But when he starts it with the chaos and the day, right? Like, that's fascinating.
I've just had a thought. I'm going to look it up right now.
Yeah.
Utnapishtim in the flood narrative, I think, is it 7 or 9 days? No, it's 7 days of the flood in the
where?
Gilgamesh. This is the Gilgamesh Tablet 11, if I remember correctly, the Utnapishtim narrative. So he has 7 days rather than 40 days of rain and then 100 whatever days is in the
7's interesting for that.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about it until you just said that just now. Okay, so 7 shows up in various ways that would have been familiar. In the same way that, I guess 100, in our culture, hundreds, decimals, right? Round decimal numbers kind of feel natural to us in some way, or they have numbers have a feel to them, right? If I said 27, that feels weirder than 20 for.
Yeah, or if it was like, he ran 100 yards, you'd be like, oh, he was scoring a touchdown,
right.
You just automatically
insert it
into your category, when you hear certain things. And I feel like they would have gotten to 7 and the rest, and the fact that there had been no battle and it was all goodness. Like, I feel like that would have been like the collision of so many different, mind-blowing ideas. It's just really lovely. Yeah.
So talk about that a bit more. You've mentioned it a couple times. There's no battles, right? So, when I talk about those classes, I say, well, one of the weird things about Genesis 1 is like nobody dies. Nobody gets ripped into shreds. So what would have been the common expectation for the creation of the world?
Well, sure. I mean, they do a lot of really, some things are totally normal, but you've got lots of deities having interactions, and
that's a very polite way to put it.
Yes,
interactions.
Some, yeah. Remember my audience?
Yeah. Of course. Various interactions.
They are quite obscene. Honestly, they would they would definitely be banned from the school library.
Yeah.
But they fight a lot. They politic. There's sex. There's different people vying for attention. There's good advisors. There's bad advisors. There's like compromise. There's really interesting. It actually looks a whole lot like the world today. Like if you were going to think about any sort of government, and even the ones that we really admire, there's all of these things that are involved. And some of them are really good. Like the good advisors, like you want that in your story. And then sometimes or oftentimes there's a collision, and then whoever wins the battle is kind of the deity that sits at rest, and that is That's the deity that they're claiming. And that's the deity that's their head honcho that, is in charge of their city or the way they run things. And so when God has this whole story, and there is the us, in the beginning, but generally it's just God doing it. And it's all goodness, and there's no advisors whispering in his ear. There's nothing else happening, right? There's no sex, there's no violence, there's no politicking. It's just these solo decisions that are good. And then he rests, and that's it. Like that's insane. And, as I was kind of meditating on it.
Insane for the ancient Near Eastern ear, right?
Insane for my ear.
Okay.
Like I have no concept of a power that holds such incredible might with goodness and without any threat. Like, I don't know. I don't think I've encountered anything that happens that way. Like any place that is run with that kind of power. I've never seen it. And so I was trying to make an analogy for it, and I thought, I don't have one. I don't have a place to put this.
There's no natural analogy to it. Yeah.
There really isn't. And I really love that. And I think it's supposed to be that way. I think that's one of the things that's supposed to kind of blow our minds a little bit too. Still, I have not found even the best king, even the best authority figure. There is always a threat. There is always a need for advisors. Like our humanity just makes this one impossible. And it's what makes God God. And then when I think about that again, we get to this point where I'm like, oh, thank God he's on the throne. I can trust him better than I can trust really anything else. And so, I just love that there's no threat, and he holds all of that power without any, I don't know, just so like casually and carefully. I don't know. How do you describe that?
And I think I'm filtering my Jewish friends' minds here as well.
Oh, great.
I think they would push back and say, in creation, yes, but pretty quickly with Israel, it is, and I'm going to kill all y'all if you keep doing this, right? So there definitely is, but that is also, if you think, well, why is he? What's this? In that statement, it's if you're exploiting the poor, like if you're doing what we consider pretty horrible things today as well.
Yes. Yeah, there is the way you treat each other, right?
Yeah.
Like he will just eventually, as his image bearers, you have to stop.
Yeah.
Like, and that he just doesn't let you reflect him and continue in that forever.
Yeah.
Also, thank God.
That's a great point. Also, you mentioned in the book this, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking across the text, this is the first time we ever see a God who is just treating things in the world as objects. Like the sun is an object, the moon is an object. It's not the body of a God that's been ripped in half and stuck up there to light the sky. I wonder what that does for our view of the power of God as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the campfire would have been pretty pissed on that one.
Yeah.
Like, I think that might have been a walk away moment, like you might have lost your audience a little bit with, I think the sun as a greater light. I think that was very offensive because the sun was in charge of a lot. And so I think when God is making that a lesser light and claiming all of the attributes that the sun was responsible for, like justice and like, I don't know. That one I think would have sent everyone pretty pissed. But yeah, he pretty much is like, yeah, it's kind of a Roomba, dudes. Like I turn it on, I move it, it does what I want. Like
goes across the sky.
It goes across, it does its thing.
Especially later Egyptian accounts where it's Atum Ra, right? And you have this whole narrative going on with where it goes after it goes down, and
yeah, it's a big deal. Like I think I say it's a big dog deal. The sun was one you really don't mess with. It was touch and lightning on that. So
which is what makes it so darn depressing when David sets up cavalry who worship the god of the sun, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh man, you went there.
Yeah, well, and I make the point, I was like, God wasn't delivering, we have the campfire where they're sharing, right? But this Genesis was for the Israelites. Like, it was a message to them, and they did not take it. Like, they were ready to toss it.
Yeah.
They did the sun god thing, and it's one of the other points I make in the book. I think, as in our culture, we pick or choose our religion, and I think it's important to note the Israelites just added, like they didn't say, oh, I'm going to worship the sun god instead of Yahweh. They were like, oh, this is a sweet addition that has got to be helpful for us, because look at it, the thing is so powerful. They weren't
duct tape, as they call that in the military. Like, if one time around we'll hold it nicely, 20 times around we'll hold it even better. So
Exactly.
One God, great. 3 more, let's put them on.
Put them in, suck them in. Yeah, that's awesome.
As I was telling you before we recorded, I think this is the first book I've ever read where somebody, in a kind of a delightful and very easy to understand way, sews together ancient Near Eastern literature. The only other book I know where this is done really well, I hope I'm not offending any of my colleagues, is Jerry Unterman's Justice for All, where he does kind of an analysis of the issue of justice in the ancient Near East. But even that's more academic. This, like, I could hand this to anybody and they could read it. So it's exciting. So all of you who have been asking the Center for Hebraic Thought, like, where's the book I can hand my mom or my uncle, or to help start thinking about Israel as a member of the ancient Near East, but as distinct in these various ways, the campfire distinctions that would be made there. I think this would be certainly one of the first books you could hand somebody and see how much they like it or hate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Because I can imagine some people going like, I don't need to know that stuff. But I think you've made the case that, like, actually this really does kind of enhance. I think it's important also to say, like, look, we've only known this stuff for 5 generations of scholarship. So it's not like Christians before us who didn't know any Akkadian or Ugaritic didn't understand the creation account, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But this illuminates all kinds of things that so we're like in this privileged position where we can read what you put together here and see things that maybe previous Christians couldn't, because we're privileged to be in this point of history.
Yeah, it's pretty unique and fantastic, right? Like, how great to have at our fingertips all of this stuff that, linguists and archaeologists and everyone, they've done so much work, just really good work. And it's just sitting there ready for us to pluck. So I'm really, really thankful.
And we should say your brother is actually a Hebraist and ancient Near Eastern scholar. So you had a cheat code there that you could just, like, email your brother and get clarifications.
I did. I enlisted his daughter. She was 6 at the time, to draw a picture in there of, like, I talked about when kids do self-portraits, they're telling you about their world. Like, your kindergartner comes home and you see, oh, why are they in the corner? Like, why did they draw themselves over there? They're, like, telling on themselves, right? How they viewed the world. And so I had my niece draw a picture of what would the ancient Near Eastern little girl have drawn? How would she have seen her world? And
those were the ones that were in the book?
Yeah.
She's sick. Those are really good drawings.
I know. She's fantastic.
Okay.
Her mom's pretty good at art and stuff as well.
Impressive.
Yeah. So my niece Lucy drew, this is what the ancient Near Eastern world would look like. But that was nice to have in clutch, that Scott, my brother, I don't know if he answered all my calls because I'm his sister, or if he just felt obligated. But either way, I was so thankful for him.
He loves to tell people why they're wrong about things in the ancient Near East. So
it's a different, just a little bit of a different relationship when your sister calls you. So
I can imagine.
I think he's a little gentler to me.
Well, Rachel Smith, thank you for and I want to get the name of the book correctly. Rest Assured, What the Creation Story Was Intended to Reveal About Trusting God. Thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Biblical Mind Podcast. exploring the deep structures of Christian scripture. For more, visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org. Subscribe to this podcast at all the usual places so you never miss an episode.